Hello, Nick.
Hello, Matt. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and good to see, well, not that we can see you, but welcome to all those out there who are watching our talk here. Nick and I were discussing what to do this today, and we thought it's a good follow-up from our talk last week about helicopter parents. We call them snowplow parents. We thought it'd be good to talk about why parents can be that way in a general sense, or all of us in some way are seeking meaning, purpose, fulfillment, self-worth through a particular way of interacting with our environment. And that's through manipulating and objectifying objects, particularly other people, spouses, partners, children, whatnot. So Nick, do you want to kick us off, or what's the best way to get going?
Yeah. So I'll just add a little bit. I think, one of the things that distinguishes our approach is we're trying to dig down into the philosophical roots, the human condition. And I think today we're definitely going to go there in a most fundamental sense about what human needs and drives are from a psychological point of view, but also from this philosophical point of view. And putting, so if any parents felt on the spot last time, is putting that maybe in the context of being a human being. And this need for, we feel for affirmation and what's driving that. So, I learned a lot, Matt, from you, from this perspective on the pursuit of worth and affirmation from, you might call it a philosophical or existential point of view. I had studied it maybe in a level up, so to speak, a strata up in terms of self-worth, which already is kind of internal, often where people are unaware. We're not fully conscious of that. So I wonder, just as a starting point, why is it important to be thinking about self-worth, meaning, fulfillment in these terms? And I guess, what are the terms?
Yeah, thank you. I think that first and foremost, we have to appreciate that we are creatures who are seeking meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, and crave a sense of self-worth. And that is not an intermittent pursuit. It is something that we are wrestling with all the time, even when we're not consciously aware of it. And I think that's an important point. We tend not to be aware of it because we're just going about our day. But it does form or inform every decision, every thought. And I think where we can see that is really at the level of motivations, and below that, core beliefs. But we're rarely examining ourselves at that level, like what's the internal struggles that we're having, and how is that expressed. Kierkegaard loved that term because the Latin really is presses out, like what's in your heart presses out into your actions. So I think that's key. The first step is that we all are creatures who are seeking meaning, purpose, and fulfillment and self-worth. Secondly, we are creatures who live in an environment, in a lived world. And so it is natural to seek meaning, purpose, and fulfillment somehow through some engagement in this lived world, in this environment, in this context, in this community. And the question is, is that a good thing or a bad thing, or could perhaps be a good thing? Maybe not. What are some of the potential struggles and problems of an overly focused pursuit of meaning in the external world? So I guess that's a good place to start in terms of a very abstract.
Yeah. Can I give maybe a couple of examples I think relate?
Yeah.
To kind of ground anchor.
Yeah, please.
So one is, it's actually in the book that I wrote, we quote this professor who said he was unaware, and it highlights the unconsciousness. He said 35 years into her teaching career, looking back, she realized one of the main things she was trying to do in the classroom was look smart.
Right.
Was appear smart to her students. And she realized that this was a different intention than to teach them and to help them learn at a fundamental level. So we can ask, well, why was that? What's going on here? And it's not to critique her necessarily. It's just to say, you can not be aware. It can be ever present. You can be an expert in your field and still not be fully aware. That's in that retrospection and introspection that this can surface. The second, one of my favorite books is by a Buddhist monk. He's born into a Buddhist monk family. He's raised for 25 years. He's at the facing basically death, and he reflects, and he didn't die. He wrote the book. He realizes, oh, a lot of what motivated my studying of Buddhism was to be, as he called it, a goody good. I was trying to please my parents. I was trying to please my teachers. It wasn't. So he realizes this fundamental distinction, how much of it was from the external, the pursuit of affirmation, rather than some other kind of engagement in the task. So is this the kind of thing you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think that's a great example because, and I think it shows that we can be so attentive or so preoccupied with our lived world, with our environment, what's going on kind of in our daily lives, that we are absent to ourselves. And really absent, and what's really interesting is we're absent in the present. We tend to either be focused on the future, like, okay, I need to be, like, think about that professor. She's walking into the class thinking, okay, I'm going to teach this, I'm going to be here. But really, the whole time she's like, well, what are they going to think of me? Am I smart to these students? She is not really present in that moment. She is thinking about, the student's assessment of her and perhaps the consequences of that, and yet unaware of it. But she's kind of over here and not really present. What's that? Go ahead.
I would say preoccupied. Actually, the word includes that. Prior to the present moment, I am occupied. My mind is occupied by something else.
Right.
Yeah.
And even I'm just going to say, no, just going to say, and then there's, people who are kind of backward focused, like, guilt, even shame, I think has this idea of something I've done in the past is having consequences. I mean, I think we always live kind of somewhat future oriented, but that can either show up in terms of anxiety or, kind of guilt and shame, and how we're compensating for that.
I think this term absent to ourself is so evocative to me.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit. Can you just elaborate on that phrase a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's, if we are creatures who are always seeking meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, then, and that informs every decision, then, and if we're unaware of it, and yet this is the very essence of who we are, then we are absent to ourselves. Because, and then you are prey to maybe cultural norms that are less than fulfilling, or less than really fruitful for you, and or maladaptions and kind of distortions that you've created for yourself to kind of help you through abusive situations or whatever happens in the past. You've created these distortions that kind of help you compensate and adapt with that pain. And so, and as long as you are unaware of those dynamics, you really aren't really attuned to what really is going on inside you. So the example I give for myself is, and I've mentioned this a couple of episodes ago, about my own just insatiable need for recognition, which was based in part of my parents. They grew up in pretty crummy circumstances, and so they lived vicariously through the kids and our academic and athletic successes, and failures too. But that's there were penalties. There was anyway, so so I unfortunately perpetuated that and imposed it on my kids, and I was unaware of it for so long, and yet that dynamic was going on. That was my present, was I need my kids to be the best in this, this, and this, so that I get some acclaim from that. And yet I was unaware of that. So I was really absent to myself. And, thinking about snowplow parents, here they are in a situation where they may have these fleeting thoughts that, yeah, I'm really helping my child out by helping them get into, this elite school or any college or whatever. And yet we have to ask, well, is that really for them, or are you doing it for yourself?
Hmm.
And if you can't answer that truthfully and see how much it is for yourself, then you are absent from yourself. I don't know, is that kind of
Yeah.
make
But
sense?
I wonder if this scenario you're describing is particularly difficult to gain access to because it appears other serving, but is, on your account, fundamentally self-serving.
Right.
And so that conscious, aware, and public layer, right, is very appealing.
Yeah, and I think it also, I think another thing to really appreciate about that perspective or that stance is that it's really hard to get away from it. I mean, it's how you've grown up, it's how you've adapted and kind of learned. There's a comfort in that, and that just kind of like the way, and and it also serves a need. Like I think I love this. What I love, you make this point in procrastination. Like, let's appreciate what it does serve a function, and that's why we keep doing it. So the same thing here. It's serving a function. It is providing some feedback that is good for us, because if we push our kids, they do better, then that's great. We feel better about ourselves. And then it's also, I think, it takes a tremendous amount of courage, strength, honesty, and some humility to kind of turn around and say, wow, this is really awful what I'm doing here. Like, this is not good. Um, and that, I think, that's really, that really frightens us. So we might have those moments, but to really admit it, and then also to admit that maybe this problem is bigger than ourselves. Like for me, I needed counsel. I wasn't going to fix it on my own. I needed to, I mean, for my own personal beliefs, it was counseling with tremendous amount of prayer and wrestling with God, and that really helped me a lot. I'm not like I'm some saint now. It's, I'm still struggle, but it really helped me a lot. But yeah, I mean, I got to a point where I'm like, I need to do something here. Like, and I don't know what that triggers that. I mean, for others, I'm just saying, for me, there was that point where I was like, yeah, I've got to do this.
Well, one aim, not to intellectualize that, because
No,
that was
please.
very revealing and challenging, and also probably uplifting experience. But one thought that occurred to me is you had to go that deep into your faith, which I know is very fundamental to you.
Right.
Draw upon that resource in order to make this change. So on the one hand, you could say that's how deep one needs to go, because we're conditioned, and we have the organism, we're socially conditioned, and human beings probably have some need for affirmation and belonging. I think that makes sense from my framework and the psychological lens. But then what does it take if we see that that's not adaptive in our lives? It's not helpful. It's not helpful to other people. What does it take to change? It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah,
I think on the one hand, it also helps people see, if it hasn't worked so far, it's not impossible, but that's the magnitude of the task quite often.
yeah, and it's also the road less traveled. It's not like everyone in the world is doing this and is introspective, and so there are cultural norms that we have are based on not being attentive to yourself. And so, just think about parenting. It's like there is these currents that, like, yeah, you want to get your kids in the best school, and yeah, be a snowplow parent, and that's the signaling that's going on. And so it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm doing what everyone else is doing, and so I must be doing it right. And so to wake up and say, wow, this is nuts, and really deleterious to my kids and to myself, and then to really make some serious changes. Yeah, you're just gonna. It's not like you're gonna. It's not like the world's gonna stand up and affirm you. and say, oh, it's great, you're doing a great job. Like they might be like, what's going on? Like, why why aren't you this way? Or
you're doing a great job going against the stream.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, countercultural.
So I think so I just want to, and I think we do a good job of this in a lot of our courses and our talks. We're like, hey, doing this is hard, and it's not like, yeah, if all this signaling and pointers you get from the world are kind of pointing the opposite direction, to turn around and do it what we think is the right way, it is a road less traveled, and it takes a lot of courage, because and think about it, if you were trying to get affirmation from those around you, and now you're going counter to that, well, there goes that resource or
right,
place for getting affirmation. So
the source of that need being met.
yeah,
you're
exactly.
actually going away from it.
Exactly.
I have a question, but I will also point out that I'd be curious if Kierkegaard talks about that, or others talk about that particular point. The Buddha apparently. So we talk in Buddhism. You talk about they talk about a stream entrance, someone who's made an awareness and then steps into the stream. And my understanding of that metaphor is that, and then you're going to walk against the stream.
Right.
You're walking against the stream toward compassion and wisdom. Right. These are not the prevailing understand and an accurate, undistorted view of reality. So that that's what you're taking on when you step into the stream of enlightenment. You're going against the stream. And so I think this affirms your point. But one thing I was going to if I can come back to, you talk about being attentive to the self. So I'm wondering, what's the difference between being attentive to the self and being self-centered? Because they sound kind of similar, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say that self-centered is more about how can I get the world to satisfy my needs. Whereas attentive to yourself is really, I think, looking at your motivations and core beliefs and evaluating those and say, why am I doing this? Is it really an act of love what I'm doing right now? Or is it really the best way I can serve others? Or is it really to serve my own needs? So I think that's what differentiates self-centeredness, where I don't think there is the attention to self. I think it's more like, look, everything just serves my needs. And so my job, my kids, the audience that I'm talking to, everything is, serving my needs. And so there's a selfishness there that hopefully the attentive self can wake up to and say, wow, I tend to project my needs and expectations onto my lived world, onto others, and I'm manipulating them or trying to get them to give me the affirmation that I need. And that is, we talked about this last week, that is really reducing others to objects that I am manipulating to get what I need. That is, to me, the definition of self-centeredness. Versus attentive to self is more, I think, an honest exploration, almost an excavation of what is going on in these dynamics underneath you, and hopefully getting to a point where you don't impose, or you are increasingly less inclined to impose expectations and needs on others.
This makes me think of one example I gave last week, and so I'm wondering if you could look at that through this lens we're talking about now. So I think the last time we talked about this phrase that I like from Ram Dass: the best thing I can do for you is work on me.
Right.
So I don't think that's in a self-centered way. It's to work on me often, so I'm not turning you into an object, or I'm not fulfilling my needs on you, or I'm not projecting what I think you need because I want it. Right. So yeah, maybe I answered my question or something, but
well, let me put it this way, like,
how would you frame that into the self?
Yeah, I think self-centeredness, I think there is a lack of self-awareness, and again, there's no questioning of manipulating the world around you. I don't think they're even aware of it. They're just kind of out there doing, they're just, everything serves my needs. Whereas the person who, and I think that, the self-centered person is, of course, projecting their needs and expectations. Like they're the person who's like expecting you to do X, Y, and Z for them. Like that's, like you think about a marriage, a really self-centered person is saying, well, you need to do this, 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 and this. It's always you need to change. It's always externalized, right? So you need to do this, you need to do this. These are my expectations. If not met, then I'm angry or I'm upset or I'm out of here. That's a self-centered person. Whereas someone who's attentive to self, again, you have to recall that it's not like you completely abase yourself or you just cater to other people's needs. That's another form of selfishness, I think. We talked about conflict avoiders. That's another posture of trying to satisfy your needs by just manipulating others by not engaging in conflict.
Placating or something else. That's still
Right.
strategy.
So attentive to self is you can appreciate the fact that we are creatures who are always seeking meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, right? So that never goes away. So even the self-attentive person is going to be thinking about what's giving them purpose and fulfillment. The thing is, do you see how you project that, or in a negative, deleterious, harmful way, project that onto others? Or are you finding that need for fulfillment in a way that makes you less inclined to manipulate others? So this is where, for like in my faith, my Christian faith, if I can find more and more of my meaning through intimacy with God, then I find that I don't need to have people think I'm great. I don't need to be the center of attention. I don't need people to praise me after something I've done. I don't need that. So I'm not frustrated when I don't get it, or I don't do little things to get others to give me that acclaim. So that's a process of what's called my sanctification. I'm being hopefully formed into someone who's finding their meaning and purpose fulfillment in God, so that I can actually be more present to other people. And I can actually start thinking about what are their needs, and how do I best serve them? I can actually really start to love others, because the first thing I'm doing is not imposing my will and imposing my needs on them. But I'm still trying to seek meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. I'm just finding it in a way that makes me a better person to other people.
Well, you actually anticipated my next question, I think. So I was going to say, well, it seems like I could see someone listening, and maybe I'm a little still figuring this out, but
as we all are, yeah.
The human drive and need for meaning, purpose, and fulfillment can lead us to externalize, can lead us to manipulate the world for that affirmation. Yet at the same time, it seems like pursuit of meaning and purpose and fulfillment is also an antidote to some of that. And I think you got there at the end when you said, well, meaning, purpose, and fulfillment pursued in particular ways and not others. I don't want to oversimplify, but
right. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, the goal is not to get rid of that, because it's just fundamental to who we are. And you are going to find. Somehow, some way, you're going to try to find meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. That's core to who we are, and that is going to inform your actions, your thoughts, and so you can't get away with it. The question is, how are you going to do it? And even the fact that we pointed to the wisdom traditions and whatnot. This is where obviously I have one pursuit, and I think it's the right pursuit, and I'm unabashedly this person who advocates a contemplative Christian path towards finding meaning and purpose through intimacy and the presence of God. I just think that's right. I find incredible joy with it, and even in the midst of a lot of struggles, and you've shared them with me, I find joy in that pursuit. So I'm not in any way less occupied with the pursuit of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. I'm just as much as I was 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. But by what I think is the right path, it makes me, I think, a, a, a better person towards others because I'm not as controlling. I've grown less controlling. And, you know, like I said, like I'm not as angry as I used to be. Like I think I just when I was not really aware of myself and my needs and the expectations and my need for affirmation. I think, I've talked about this and I don't want to beat this drum, but too much, but when I was at the university, particularly when I was really not really aware of myself in this way, I just remember I was doing so many really cool
Innovative
and
thing. Yeah.
innovative and sometimes I got affirmation, but a lot of times I didn't, and I was pissed a lot. I'm like, how is this person over here who's just pushing papers getting all this acclaim and no one sees this amazing event that I've put on or the way I'm doing things and you know and I was just really angry a lot. I kept it stuffed down, although I probably would explode sometimes here and there, not often at work, um yeah, that was kind of who I was. And so and that's just it's just unhealthy. It's not good for wasn't good for me, wasn't good for my family, wasn't good for coworkers, and wasn't good for the university. So
One thing I have been thinking about right recently, and so maybe I can link it here, is the crucial role of the term and the concept fulfillment.
mm-hmm.
So meaning, so people could be searching for meaning, purpose, and affirmation, right? And I think they are a lot. And so it seems meaningful and it is purposeful, but so for instance, Princeton students frequently talk about, and I think this is incredible pressure they put on themselves, is what their legacy is going to be when they're 19 years old. And it's like, what's my legacy going to be? And there's a way that I admire trying embracing big questions in the world, but it's interesting to me that the word legacy, because it's not impact, it's legacy. And I don't want to parse too much, but so it seems to me that at the very least, and age appropriate and human to be seeking this, or I look out and I see in the world people seeking achievement, I think, for affirmation. I also think that they maybe have conflated or misunderstood, or they're not seeking fulfillment. And I found it useful to ask people, do you think that's going to lead to success or that's going to lead to fulfillment? And they actually have a different experience and they think differently about what they're doing, or it's a way to distinguish for themselves, like what resonates with their values, for instance, and aspirations. When you talk about fulfillment, it's somehow that word I have found useful to help people adjudicate or gain awareness of what's motivating them.
Right.
If that makes sense. And I like to look at words and then pull them apart and say, all right, why is it called fulfillment? What are we getting filled by? And I think we are getting filled.
Yeah.
We're filled versus we're getting stuff. Right. And fulfill, maybe it's coming from within. I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't actually looked up the etymology of the word. I kind of make it up for myself. But so I guess what I'm trying to, what was the question?
Fulfillment? I mean, what?
Well, I guess
what do we
look out, when you have with this lens and you look out at people who've achieved a lot, and in some sense they've had a big impact, but maybe does the idea of fulfillment help you distinguish your observations of yourself or others too? So I said, hey, this word fulfillment, I've been thinking about it lately. I kind of experiment with people. What fulfills you? Or, I just kind of do that in my work. And then I try to pay attention to what I learn back. But I'm wondering, is fulfillment have a special place? What is it? And how is it different than meaning and purpose? And why is that the third thing there? Why are we saying that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think it just kind of rolls off the tongue when we say meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, right? It's just a cultural way of the norm. What about just meaning or just purpose or just
Yeah.
fulfillment? Um, yeah, parsing those, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think they kind of, I think it's one of these human experiences that that's really hard to conceptualize or to break down and parse, as I was saying before. So it's like falling in love. Well, what does it mean to fall in love? Well, you can talk about it chemically, you can talk about body reactions, emotions, but it's just the state you kind of experience, and then it's not something you can then step away and really feel like you've got the essence of it conceptually
Mhm.
by diagnosing it or something like that, and so um yeah, it's like interesting
Yeah.
in the Christian tradition you had this sense of like, how do you describe God? And um they're like, well, we have all these words, but they never quite are adequate, so they call it the apophatic way. Like, you kind of say God's this, well, but he's not. He's more than that.
Mhm.
Like, so it's
What's that called? Apophatic?
apophatic. I'm pretty
Cool.
sure. It's been like decades since I studied all this stuff. There's another word to talk about positive affirmations of God. I can't remember. I'll look it up. I can't remember. But I remember apophatic way. It's called negativa, like via negativa. Like, there's this way you're negating
Mhm.
everything we say of God is just less than what he actually is, and so you can kind of say it, but then you have in the next breath say, well, it's not really
It's always qualified. This is the
qualified
closest
yet.
we can get. Yeah.
So kind of the same thing with these other experiences. Like, you kind of know what it is, but you're just trying to throw words at it and hope it sticks. But I like fulfillment because, and you know, I think I think what I think what humans are really, really scared of is a sense of emptiness. That, like we always talk about fear of failure. Well, like, what's so bad about failure? Like, we all fear it, like we all don't want to experience it. But why is that a bad experience? Like,
Mhm.
and why are we so protective of ourselves? Because I think in the end, if we realize, and I'm just saying hypothetically, we were nothing, like that really everything was empty. I think that deep down in our soul, that just would be so devastating to us that we strive to say, no, I do have meaning. And so having experiences that fill that, so there's no sense of that emptiness, um, are what we pursue. And yeah,
Well, interesting, right? Empty is opposite of full.
yeah,
Full,
so,
being
yeah,
full. So fulfillment. One thing that occurred to me as you were talking, to kind of answer my own question, is I wonder if meaning, purpose, fulfillment is an alternative to achievement. It's a way to describe an outcome or an end product, an experience, not in terms of, so achievements are attainments out in the world.
right.
So what happens when we seek meaning and act purposefully? We experience fulfillment, and that may bring achievement, and probably often does, actually, but it's not described in that way. Right? Achievement is comparative. It's out in the world. People recognize it. So I don't know if this makes sense, but that it's the kind of almost like a subjective alternative to achievement. That we want to talk about process and motivation, but we also want to talk about the result.
Right.
And so fulfillment is a kind of result, but is not external. It's not like achievement or material gain or impact or legacy.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it also can be a precondition. Like, what if you are fulfilled and come to a situation where you're not needing,
Yeah.
to
Someone else
achieve.
to fill you up,
Right. You're
to
already
give you something. You're
fulfilled.
full.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I always like if I lead Bible studies and we're talking about Jesus's life. I'm like, and Kierkegaard actually talked about this. He's like, everything Jesus did was pure love. Like, he never needed anything from anyone else, and that didn't make him less human, and just made him kind of the ideal human. So that he was so present, he was acting towards everyone exactly how he needed to act to love them, even when it came across as harsh. And I don't know if that's it resonated with me. I don't know if it
Mhm.
resonates with anyone else in my Bible studies, which probably shows me my my lack of ability as a Bible study leader. But it's really fascinating when you look at it that way. You're like, okay, because he does treat people kind of harshly at times. And you're like, wow, and if you see it as an act of love, then it kind of, you have to kind of recalibrate what it means to love someone, because love isn't necessarily like, oh, you're amazing, I'm affirming you, you're great. That's not necessarily love. And in fact, that might be an act of selfishness on my part.
How
Um,
so?
because by affirming you, I get what I need. You're like, oh, like, thanks, I feel great. And they're like, oh, good. Where
Made
it's
you
an
feel
easy,
great.
yeah, you made me feel great, so I feel great. I think it's a very, I would call it consequentialist, kind of utilitarian approach to love. Like, you're calculating how people are going to respond to your acts, and that's how you act towards them. Like, okay, if I do this, that person's going to give me what I want and what I need, so I'll do it, and it's called an act of love. I mean, like a really crude example is, like, let's say you mess up in your marriage and you run out and get a little, some flowers or whatever, and you give them to them. They're like, and your spouse is like, oh, that's so great. Thank you. I forgive you. And you're like, whew, like, was that really an act of love? Partly, maybe, but, it was muddied by your own need for your spouse to signal back to you that you're forgiven, everything's okay. And you did it by this getting flowers. So I probably ruined, people's,
Thanks, Matt.
yeah.
Okay.
But that's being, again, that's like, you got to look at your motivations and why am I doing. Now, it doesn't mean you don't ask for forgiveness and, do things that are appropriate, but like, are you satisfying your own needs? And you are, again, trying to manipulate someone to get that signal back that you're all's forgiven, all's well, we're cool. There's appropriate ways to ask for forgiveness, but do you do it in a way that's non-manipulative?
So a couple words that come to mind, and I was going to ask you. So you referenced, I think, big schools of thought in philosophy or ethics: consequentialism, utilitarianism. There's a kind of transactional nature.
Yep.
This description you're talking about. So, so you're bringing that lens and saying there's some limitations to that. So what's the alternative to? So I think a lot of people think that's what makes the world go round. So what's the alternative? And can you locate that in a school of thought, since you went there,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we've positioned ourselves as somewhat intellectual on these topics.
Yeah, I think, well, let's appreciate the fact that we do live in a very utilitarian world, where things are evaluated by their consequences. And utilitarianism is a subspecies or whatever of consequence. So consequentialism is basically, just as it says, looking at the anticipated consequences, and you're evaluating whether you do this thing or that thing. You deliberate based on projected consequences. And there are other forms of ethics that don't do that, but like absolutism. There, we talked about it some other time. But anyway, so, and a utilitarian is, so consequentialism. The question is, well, how do you evaluate the consequences? And utilitarianism is just one way of doing that. Like, that's I think a good way of looking at it. What's the utility? And there's like all these different ways to measure it. And like this, you can actually make it a mathematical formula in terms
Practical ethics.
Yeah, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great utilitarian philosophers, Peter Singer, was at Australian, was at Princeton University for quite a while. Anyway, but so that's where we're looking at the consequences. So I forgot. Oh, what's different?
So I think you're saying that your way of thinking, this approach that we're of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, or whatever at that level, does not get categorized under that school. So what school is it, or how would we frame it if somebody wanted to read up on it, or look into it, or kind of contextualize or frame this position? It's not a utilitarian, it's not consequentialist, it's not absolutist, I guess. What is it?
Well, I think there's a different number of different schools you can look to that are non-consequentialist. So absolutism is one of them. That's where you're just trying to maintain certain absolutes, like certain ethical principles that you hold to no matter what the consequences are. That's one thing. This is, Immanuel Kant was considered an absolutism, which is actually not quite true. But he had this famous example where a murderer comes to your door and asks, that they're trying to murder someone who's in your house, and they ask you where that person is, and the question is, what do you tell them? So utilitarians like, well, don't, or consequentialists like say, well, if you tell them the truth, that person's getting murdered, so don't do that. And Kant, in contrast, says no, you have to maintain honesty, so you have to tell them where that is. And we would teach this to students when I was precepting classes at the university, and they would freak out like, how could you do that? That's crazy. Anyway, so that's an example of absolutism, if that makes sense, to hold an ethical principle no matter what the consequences are. Now, there's absolutism isn't the only alternative. There's a whole myriad of if you could look to religious traditions that are non-consequentialists. And Christianity has schools within it that are non-consequentialists, and Kierkegaard would fall into that category. He was, he has a book, I won't go into it, called Fear and Trembling, where he looks at if you know the Old Testament story of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, and he does it from a pseudonymous perspective, and he's like, that pseudonym is just like, can't get his head around this infanticide, this act. And anyway, I won't go into it, but there's a Christian perspective where I'm not looking at the consequences in the lived world, in my environment. I'm not evaluating that. I'm simply trying to please God and bring him joy and in my action. So there's kind of a consequentialist element to that, but the consequences are more vertical, let's say, like your relationship with God, and not, well, I'm going to evaluate, how things are going to play out in the lived worlds. And then, in the Buddhist tradition, I'm sure there's non-consequentialist approaches as well.
From what I'm not a scholar in the same way that you are, Buddhism. So, but what I can gather, I think there's a lot of corresponding schools within Buddhism that correspond to different traditions in Christianity in terms of how one achieves salvation. Is it through acts? Is it through intention? I think from what little I know about, say, the Protestant denomination, I think there's a lot of quite analogous. So this tells me something about human beings and how we pursue what we think is good, I think. But absolutely, there's non-consequentialists. In fact, just not to get too far into it, but I think this is what we actually bring to the conversation, is a strata of discussion of the issue that perhaps is not discussed elsewhere. So we may lose some people, or it may seem abstruse or esoteric, but from my understanding,
we're not worried about the consequences.
That's right, exactly. We started this quote podcast because we were just going to have conversations. If anybody wants to come along, we are glad to have you.
Yeah.
But this idea that intentionality is the basis of karma, that what we intend, not the consequence, is because that's what we can control. So it's a very I heard this term, psychoethical framework. So what I can do, it is a big part of what I think is right. I can be compassionate. I can intend to be kind. I can intend to be wise. I can, in an indeterminate, complex world, I can't always can always know the consequence, right?
Right.
What I can know or come to become skillful at is to direct my actions.
You actually hit on one of the big critiques of consequentialism and utilitarianism, as you think you know what the consequences are going to be, but you don't.
Yeah.
And in that gap, there's this space of doubt that ethicists who don't ascribe to consequential said, like, because there is this doubt, that shows that consequentialism can't be the right way. Actually, Kierkegaard draws on an analogy from Socrates. I don't want to bore people, but I'm going here. They're in the, I think it's in the Gorgias, the Socratic, Plato's dialogue called the Gorgias, and Socrates gives this example of a boat captain who ferries people across a body of water, and they all land. He gets off. After they all disembark, he's walking along the shore and thinking, "Wow, I really did a good thing. I got these people, safely from point A to point B." He's kind of patting himself on the back, and then he starts doubting himself and going, "Well, did I do a good thing? Like, what happens if one of the people in this city, something falls on their head and they die? I didn't do a good thing for them." And Kierkegaard, I don't know if that makes sense, but he's like, he's thinking, I did a good thing because of the consequences, or the result was that everyone's safe. But then he's like, well, maybe not. Like 10 minutes from now,
what happens next? Yeah.
What happens next? So Kierkegaard picks this up and runs with it and says that, yeah, there's this gap between your intentions and your actions and what the consequences really are, and you don't know what those are. And so for him, that leads, and this is actually going to be a good segue, I think, for us, but for him, that says, why then would you base your self-worth on these actions in the lived world, and you're trying to manipulate it when you don't know if you can do it? You don't know if you can pull it off. It seems kind of crazy to him that, if the most important thing, like this fundamental relationship you have with yourself is so core to who we are. Why on earth would we base it on something that we know is we can't guarantee that will give us the fulfillment that we want, or the consequences that we want?
So it's uncertain, it's contingent, but we've bound ourselves to that thing. So the consequence, so long as we do that, is anxiety.
Exactly.
And that's unknowable.
Yeah. That's one of the points we wanted to get to today, was that, I think people need to appreciate that, like, why am I so anxious? Or why is there this base level of anxiety that we all experience? It's because of that point. We don't know. We have invested our lives in trying to get meaning and purpose from the lived world, but it's not guaranteed that it's going to respond in the way that we want. And because we kind of know that prior to acting in that way, we experience this anxiety. Like, will it turn out the way I want? Will it, will it happen? And that is part, because we can reflect on it kind of at a certain level. Like Kierkegaard has this point, reflection always has the other possibility. Like, you want this one thing to happen, but reflection is like, has a duality in it. Does that make sense? Like,
keep going.
Well, okay, I really want I'm gonna get these flowers, and because I really messed up with my spouse and I want her to respond in this way, right? So, I mean, this is kind of a silly example, but that's the consequences I want, but it's not guaranteed that she's going to respond. Maybe that's inadequate. I really messed up and I need to do something more. I mean, not, my wife wouldn't be this way. I mean,
people can see, I think we might say someone can see through the intention and be more irritated. You're just trying to make up for that with these silly flowers, when that was that's completely disproportionate. You're trying to manipulate me, right? We've all experienced that. Somebody's trying to.
And we kind of hold that, and that's the thing. Like, we can say what we want, but then there's the possibility of it not happening in some other concept, some other something else plays out. So we know that, we can anticipate it, and so there's this little bit of anxiety, like, I hope this works, and it may seem trivial, but think about, if our self-worth is really so embedded in the things of this, in the pursuit of the things of this world, then that is going to breed a leveling of anxiety that I think if we become attentive to ourselves, we'll see, there's a lot of anxiety there for most of us.
So I think to kind of contextualize this last stream of our conversation, I think what we're kind of exploring is, okay, if you're not pursuing achievement and attainment and affirmation, particularly affirmation from the lived world, from our society, then what guides you? right? I think that's what we're saying. And
Right.
those things are consequentialist. That's telling you what's right. Somebody affirmed you, that must be right. You achieved in the world, and that was good, right? And we're saying, well, not necessarily. And at the very least, comes with that orientation is a kind of inherent anxiety that is bred by uncertainty of contingency. It has to be. It is the way of any future event that has not yet taken place.
Right.
That is so. If you're banking on that, then you will have a sense of uncertainty by definition.
Right.
Because it's unrealized. So I think that's where we're saying, okay, that orientation, our stance, I think you use that word, or posture, brings with it. It entails this sense. And so we're trying to say, well, what's some sort of alternative to that? I think that's how we got here, right?
Yeah.
We're saying if you don't have that orientation, or if you do, this is what follows. And is it possible to have another orientation, stance, or posture?
Yeah, and that's where I think we're pretty open about our existential religious perspectives, because that's where we find that. And so this is where, again, we don't want to proselytize, but I'm pretty open about where I think meaning, purpose, and fulfillment is found. And but we pointed to the wisdom tradition as alternatives. So anyway, but I want to, before I lose it, can I go back to say one thing? Isn't it interesting? You talk about students who are worried about legacy, and I've heard this in Christian churches, and I think it's as well, this idea of legacy, and I think it's nuts. But what does it mean to really want to have some kind of legacy? And I could be wrong, but part of it's like you want folks to think about you after you're dead, or just in some way. You want to be in their minds and have them focused on you somehow. I mean, that's part of my need for recognition, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want people to be like, oh, Matt's amazing, like he's smart and he's super athletic, or he's this or he's that. I'm like, I really need people to have me in their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, really? Like, it's kind of silly. But how fleeting that would be, because and I remember talking to my kids about this.
I just want to say, I really like this description, because it's so fundamentally psychological.
Right.
I want someone else's brain to be firing Matt, Nick, Nick, right? That's what I want. And and then you'd be like, what? Right. You want someone's electrochemical processes to generate an idea favorable to their idea about you. That's what I'm trying to do in my life. Like, what? It does seem absurd.
And have it sustained.
Right.
It's got to stay there. It's got to linger. It's not like a 1 second.
Unborn people have to think this.
Yeah. As long as I get a statue of me, somewhere on Prince University, everything will be amazing. It would really, I don't know. Oh, I just think it's crazy. Again, and I think that just shows, like, I'm trying to somehow overtake you and your thought processes and get you focused on me. That's fundamentally what's going on.
Yeah, the psychological level, focus. Yeah. I've never thought of it that way. I think it's very powerful.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, like, I remember talking to one of my kids, I can't remember. Well, they were worried about, I think how they're dressing up for something. And I went to them and said, well, everyone else is thinking about what you're going to think about them, and how they're dressed, and you want them to be focused on you. So all of you are like a cross currents, or cross, with each other, and so who's going to win? I'm not really sure, but it just shows how absurd the whole game is. Anyway. But I think I just want to, so I just want to get that point. I think it was really interesting to see, the idea of legacy and how it is consistent with this idea of, kind of somehow, and again, it's like, you think about it, if I can get people to think about me positively, somehow that's fulfilling. That's filling. That's like I have, and the feeling is I don't want to be empty. I don't want to be nothing.
Yeah.
I want to be something. And if I get other people to say I'm something, that somehow is going to work. And again, there's that gap. It's like, really? I mean, it seems like everyone else is trying to do the same thing, or most people, a lot of people are doing that. And then secondly, like, it is contingent, fleeting, temporal. I mean, it might be just for like a second. It's not like, I go by the statues in Boston and see, Benjamin Franklin, whatever, and like I spend all day thinking about Benjamin Franklin. Um, it's fleeting, and so is that really going to do it? And I think fundamentally we know deep down inside of us that it won't. And so, and this is where I use this term, and I'm sure someone else came up with it, but existential adequacy. That pursuit is existentially inadequate.
Yeah.
I think we fundamentally want something that's, I would say, eternal or constant and can't be lost through time and through circumstances in our lived world. So
that's I love that term, that concept, and it does converge with Buddhism. The idea that you can bolster yourself and your sense of self to some degree, that you think of it as eternal or that it's sufficient. It's not.
Right.
That's the point. And then it's, in fact, the desire to bolster it and attach to it is the source of suffering.
Yep. Yeah, suffering. That's a good point. We haven't really talked about that. There's that idea of suffering. Some guy. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more? Because it is it's self-imposed suffering, and yet we don't see it that way, and we're so I'd love for you to.
There's a couple of ways. So we can think of it from kind of a Buddhist. So suffering looms large in Buddhist thought. It's not only focused on suffering, but it's a recognition that suffering. Sometimes people say, well, pain is you can't opt out of pain, but suffering is optional, right? So suffering is this kind of psychological response to the difficulties and pain of being in the world. And that's going to happen, right? So that's the lore of Buddhism. He was a cloistered prince, and he never saw any kind of pain. He went out in the world. He saw childbirth, he saw sickness, and he saw death. And he realized, no, okay, life is pain. These are parts of every person's life, right? You're going to have pain. But the question was, and so then that put in question, like, wait, well, that suffering is inherent to the human condition to some degree. It's not, some people say, oh, life is suffering. I don't have that. I don't ascribe to that reading of what the Buddha was saying. But that there is suffering. Suffering is as a feature, but that there's a space in between the pain and the reaction. Then the next statement is an examination of where that suffering comes from. How does it arise? Not the pain, the suffering. I shouldn't have to feel this pain. That's suffering.
Right.
I didn't used to feel this pain when I was young. That's suffering. Right. I shouldn't have this much pain. Other people don't have pain. These are all related to me, myself. What does this pain say about me? I'm not who I thought I was. I'm weak.
Right.
Relative to whom? So a lot of our suffering originates in our sense of self, and particularly the holding on to, clasping, attaching, not acknowledging that the being will change. We will age. We will have pain. We will have incursions on this body. Now, my understanding is the Buddha was also, and then some traditions of the time were saying, no, the self or consciousness or the soul, in their terminology, is the enduring. It is unchanging. And he's like, I don't know about that. Or what does it mean? What is the consequence of attaching to that or thinking that? So that's my sense. On the other hand, so that's one level. I'm not a scholar in the way that you are of your tradition in Buddhism, but I want to be a little careful and just qualify. That's my understanding. But there's a psychological level that I feel a little more comfortable, that there's these ideas of self processes, right? So the contemporary 20th and 21st century American or Western psychology centers the self. Now, what they're usually doing is saying something like, create a healthy self. in various ways. Now, a Buddhist critique of that is you've already lost the battle.
Right.
However, if you're gonna have a self, yeah, sure, be healthy. But there is a tradition in Buddhism and various, which is something like become nobody. Hold loosely to the self. Recognize that the humans will create and want and desire and have a need for self. And this self serves a function, a purpose. But it is not, this is the point of contact, it is not ultimate. It is not the ultimate thing. We imagine it to be the ultimate thing, but it is not. It will change. It will diminish. And in fact, trying to not recognizing that and trying to hold on to the self or the body is the source of so much of this suffering. And holding loosely and recognizing that that it's not eternal, that it is temporal. That's my reading. And I went back to the Buddhism, but so in psychology, we're often saying, okay, well, go achieve so you feel good. Get affirmation, and psychotherapists are like, oh, well, I'm going to affirm yourself, those emotions, right? That's a common practice, and I'm not critiquing it per se, but it does presume something about the primacy of the self that Buddhism would put in question.
Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah. I mean, I know we should probably wrap up here, and it'd be great to talk about that because when you were talking on that, I was thinking about Jim Loder, who is was a professor at Princeton Seminary who I studied under, and he wrote a book called Logic of the Spirit, and there he talks about the ego development. And I think it'd be interesting to see, like, there's the sense of the ego as the self, and he was saying that actually that self is a reaction to a sense of emptiness that we even experience in birth and whatnot, and this self becomes self-protective and is kind of like saying no to the rest of the world by manipulating and controlling it, whatever, as a way to say I exist, I assert myself over you. And I think most people think that's the self. And he said, well, actually, there's, for Loder, there's a deeper human spirit that doesn't have to hold on to this sense of self. And I think people get frightened by that because, like, well, I want to exist. So like after death, I want to still be me. Yeah. And it's not saying that. And I think there's so many parallels between the Buddhist tradition and the Christian tradition, at least from the contemplative perspective, because there's this idea of dying to yourself, of purgation, really letting yourself go and really, like Kierkegaard say, like the hardest thing to do is like let go of your self-will, like, because you want to control things. And I think they're all pointing to this, this ego that is frightened and scared because of this world that it's trying to interact with. Anyway, we can talk about that another time, but I think it's really fascinating. But the one thing I'm just thinking about trying to wrap it up and ending, what we've said is probably maybe come across as kind of harsh, like you're manipulative, selfish, whatever. And in a way, we're not going to back away from that. I mean, I think that's true because we're talking about ourselves. I'm talking about myself. And I think there's the path to freedom, I think, is really by acknowledging that and becoming aware of that. And, hopefully people become aware of themselves and how they've been manipulative and the anxiety and, just how life, I think there's a better life for people than what we typically conform to by being in the current cultural norms. So anyway, but I hope we come across not as elitist or judgmental. Hopefully we come across as fellow travelers who have really struggled with these issues. I just want to make sure we make that point. I don't know if you could say it better.
I don't know about that. I think I would say differently. I mean, I think, as is frequently the case, you bring your lens and your training as a philosopher and a frankly, I don't know if you consider yourself a theologian, but that lens. I'm fundamentally a psychologist, I think it's, and so we just ask and answer the question a little bit differently. So it's something like, and my advisor and my mentor, Marty Covington, wrote a piece, an article, very influential, about self-processes. So it's more descriptive. It's not put in an ethical framework. It's saying something like, what are the processes that humans engage to promote, protect, defend, bolster, promulgate, and sustain and lift up their sense of self? And so that might come across as a little less judgmental or harsh because it's not making a judgment. That doesn't mean it's the full story, right? That's what psychologists do, is they describe processes. And in any case, so that's what I was thinking, and they're complementary. And I think that's one of the things that I realized after many conversations, as I said, we're often talking about similar things or related or parallel, but from these different vantage points, and I think they nicely complement each other, particularly if you're trying to intervene in your own life. If you're trying to understand yourself existentially, the human condition, that philosophical lens is indispensable. For the purposes of maybe trying to intervene in your own life, make choices, set up systems, understand the process, these dynamics and ways that you can act on, I think this, not surprisingly, the psychological can be quite helpful, but it's not the end of the story.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's why I'm just always so incredibly grateful for our relationship and this time together, because it helps me just wrestling at the philosophical, I would say existential, spiritual level, and then but also the psychological, to really be informed and educated on that by you has really been helpful to me. So
feelings mutual, Matt.
Yeah. All right. So I guess should we call it a
day?
Call it a wrap it up here.
Well, thank you, Matt. I learned a lot.
Yeah, same here. All right. Until next time.